God's Word on this great feast of the baptism of the Lord. A couple of weeks ago, I went out to lunch with a friend of mine, and as she is wont to do these days, she was talking on and on about her grandkids. She's got a couple of grandkids. And then all of a sudden, the conversation turned a little bit. She got real serious. And she said, I have a question. She said, you know, my daughter and son-in-law, they don't go to church anymore. Wasn't able to kind of convey my faith to them. And so I was really kind of concerned about my grandkids. And so I don't know if I did the right thing or not, but one day when I was watching them, I took them in the bathroom and I baptized them. It's not an uncommon story. But she had some questions about that. We know there are couples, maybe your grandchildren or your kids or whatever, who have a child and they kind of trying to figure out, should we baptize this child or not? You know, we don't go to church, and I don't know what that all means anymore. So how could we baptize someone into something that we don't seem to participate in? Questions about baptism. Larger questions, theological questions about baptism. You know, what happens to people who aren't baptized? Do they all go to hell? Lots of questions about what baptism means. It starts even in the scriptures that we heard today. John the Baptist got Baptist in his name. He had questions about baptism. He says, am I baptizing you? You should be the one baptizing me. There has been a problem at times for the church to appreciate just what this feast really is, or what the actual baptism of Jesus was supposed to mean. Baptism has always been connected with sin. John's baptism was a baptism of repentance. You're sinful and you get baptized, you get washed clean. Earlier today we sang a song at Mass about being, it was, Oh Happy Day, Jesus washed my sins away. We have this notion that baptism is connected with sin, and so for a church that was trying to understand the Son of God as also one who is human, they had to struggle with this one. Because in some ways, in our crazy way of thinking sometimes, we have associated sin with being human. It defines us as human. You make a mistake, do something wrong, what do you say? I'm only human. So if we define ourselves as human beings, as sinful people, flawed people, and then Jesus becomes one of us, what do we do with that? That presents, and it has for the church for years, presented problems with understanding who this Christ is, Jesus the Christ. It gets real weird sometimes theologically when we have Jesus becomes human. He takes on this, he gets imprisoned in this flesh so that he can kind of appease God. We made this terrible mistake as human beings. God got mad at us. Now we got to make it up to him, and so he's got to send his son as one of us to die on the cross to appease him. That's the kind of God we have. It gets real confusing. How do we understand this thing of being baptized? I'm going to push all that theology aside for a second. Father Aiden often talks about the sensum fidelium, the sense of the faithful. There's a great tradition in the church that we can get all mixed up sometimes, but if you look at what the faithful do faithfully, that you'll get some sense of the truth. So I'm going to rely on our experience here of baptism. When we have someone baptized here at St. Columba, we baptize them, we bring them into church. You can note that the whole congregation just kind of goes, oh. They see this little baby, and they kind of go, oh, gee, my goodness, look at that. Isn't that amazing? I mean, babies are born all the time, but isn't that amazing? I have had time lately since I retired to do something that I've been meaning to do for a long time, have these boxes and boxes of 8mm home movies. You know, oh my God, what if there's a fire or something, we lose all these things. So finally I got around to getting them digitized. So I've been looking at all these old home movies. Now my dad and his twin brother, sons of a good German grandfather, who loved all this technology, and so he got them a movie camera when they graduated from high school in 1939. So we have all this treasure trove of great movies. And my folks' wedding is on a movie, and all these things. What I started realizing as I watched these over and over again is these great celebrations surrounding our baptisms. My own baptism. See my own baptism on film. My brothers and sisters' baptism, all our cousins. You can see all these baptisms going on. Now my dad and my uncle weren't really good with this newfangled contraption of a camera that they didn't really understand. So all these films of baptism begin in this total darkness. It's all black because it was inside the church, and all you see are like 3 or 4 little lights, which are the candles in church. And then my dad is backing down the aisle as the priest is bringing the baby down after the end of the service, and all of a sudden it breaks into light. And you see this little infant, and you see all the aunts and uncles gathering around and just kind of going, oh my gosh, look at this. I see my aunts, pinching my cheeks and just saying, oh, you're so lovable. They didn't say that when I was 18 years old and my hair was down to here and I was protesting the Vietnam War, but then they were going, isn't this kid just an amazing gift of God? That's the key. That's the clue to our celebration of the baptism of the Lord. That Jesus comes up out of the water and the sky opens up and God said, this is my beloved in whom I am well pleased. Oh my gosh, look at this. Isn't this amazing? And with Jesus, he was an adult. It wasn't because he was a cute little baby, but God still says, this is my beloved in whom I am well pleased. Because this is the Christ. This is the one who was there when we were all created, when the whole universe was created. Colossians 1:15-20. Christ reveals the invisible God. He is the firstborn of all creation. In him, everything, and through him, everything was created. And now it comes to fruition when this Christ is Jesus. You are my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Jesus reveals to us that we, created in his image, are loved by God. We share in that revelation, that we too are loved by God. This is the end of the Christmas season because this is the final revelation that we celebrate. We celebrated Christmas when Jesus as the infant entered the world. Peace, good tidings. Then last week we celebrated the Epiphany when we heard that this Jesus came not just for some little burg of Bethlehem over in the corner of the world, but he came for everybody. And that was the second revelation, that this was for all peoples. And today we celebrate that the message that is to be proclaimed to all people is that, like Christ, we are beloved of God. That's the revelation. That first and foremost, we are not sin. First and foremost, we are not flawed. We're not bent over and we need to be fixed in some way. We are first and foremost created in God's image. Sin does not make us human. Sin is what keeps us from being truly human. We celebrate the revelation of Jesus here, coming out of the waters of the Jordan, as the revelation that he is the Son, my Son, he is God. But we also celebrate that he is human. Not as some kind of play acting thing that he's doing. He's truly human, but he's also true humanity. This is what it means to be human. Christ will reveal that to us. Christ is without sin because he's truly human. We are struggling to be truly human, still weighed down by our sins, trying to overcome those things that keep us from being human, truly human. That's the revelation in the baptism of the Lord that we celebrate today. Finally, let's take down all the Christmas decorations. Christmas season is over. We have finally got the whole story. We finally got this last installment that says not only is Jesus, the Son of God, born to us as an infant, not only is this message that he proclaims something that needs to be proclaimed to the whole world, but what that message is that we are beloved. We are loved by God. Let me hear one of those St. Columba sighs that we hear at baptisms. We are loved by God. Being loved by God, receiving fully this revelation that we are created in God's image, that Christ is the one through whom we were created. So as he is loved, we are loved. If we truly understand this, we will understand then the call that we hear in the first reading from the prophet to be the victory of justice, to go forth and proclaim light to the nations, to go forth and free the captives. We will truly understand that if we know that we are loved, because justice, probably first and foremost, is not us going around trying to fix the world because it's God made a mistake and we got to make it right for him. Justice is not fixing the world. Justice is believing that we are loved by God and creating a world with political structures and economic structures and ways of organizing our lives and ways of organizing our families and our nations and everything else, so that we know that we are loved by God. We don't imprison people and dehumanize them. We don't reject people trying to cross a border because they're trying to keep their families safe. We call them thieves and rapists and say, no, they are loved by God. And our call to justice is to create a world that says to them, says to us over and over again that we are loved by God. I started this with a question, or all the questions of surrounding baptism. Let me end with a question. It's kind of a funny question, actually. I didn't know that this was something to be debated, but I saw recently in some Catholic website these liturgists questioning when we should dip our hand in the holy water fountain and bless ourselves. Bigger things going on, bigger fish to fry, but liturgists can get distracted at times. Hope there's no liturgists here. When do we put, and they seem to all agree that when we enter the church, as we do here at St. Columba, we put our hand in the holy water fountain and we bless ourselves because we are reminding ourselves that we have been baptized and that we are beloved of God. Sometimes we walk in here after a really tough week of work, a week out in that world that sometimes uses us and abuses us. Sometimes in a world that only appreciates us as spenders or who only appreciate us because of who we pretend to be. And we come into the doors and we put our hand in that water and we bless ourselves and we remind ourselves that yes, we are loved by God. Now the controversy for these folks comes up is when you leave church, do you put your hand in the holy water and bless yourself? How many people here, when they leave church, put their hand in the holy water and bless themselves? Wow, got an enlightened crowd here. These conservative types who say, don't do that because you come in that door out of that secular world that's contaminated with sin and all that kind of stuff, and you need to wash yourself clean when you come into this sacred space. And so when you're leaving, why do you need to wash yourself when you're going back out into that world? You're already clean, so you don't need to do that. I'm going to go with most of you and say, let's dip our hand in the water, remind ourselves of our baptism as we go out into the world. Jesus came out of the water in his baptism and began his public ministry, went out into the world to proclaim good news to the captives, sight to the blind, freedom. And so he did that when he heard how beloved he was of God. When we leave church here, let's dip our hand in that water, bless ourselves, and remember that we are loved by God. Let's dip our hand in that water, bless ourselves, recall that we were created in God's image. We are Christ to the world. We are beloved of God. Amen.
Let us all stand together as we recite our baptismal promise.